Hey, good morning again, and welcome to our video learning session again. And today, our topic is about accounting for factory overhead. Now, what is factory overhead? Factory overhead costs are costs that are incurred in the manufacturing process other than the direct materials and direct labor. It is used to describe indirect costs associated with manufacturing any products. It is also known as manufacturing overhead. Normally, these costs are accumulated into a cost pools and allocated to units uh, during the period, and it is charged to expense account when the unit produced are later sold as a finished goods. Now, uh, the factory overhead is composed of indirect materials, indirect labor, and other manufacturing expenses. Indirect materials are materials needed for production but not directly used as raw materials. For examples, factory supplies, packaging materials, small tools charged to expense, cleaning supplies used in the factory, lubricants, fuels, and the like. Now, indirect labor are labor costs of those employees who are not directly associated with the production process. Examples of which are salaries of production supervisors, factory payroll clerks, quality assurance manager, receiving clerk, storeroom clerk, and other overtime premiums and fringe benefits provided to our laborers. Other manufacturing expenses includes factory rent, factory utilities such as light and power, factory building insurance, depreciation of the factory property and equipment, taxes of the uh, property where the factory is located, and other expenses like security. Now, this is the journal entry for the factory overhead. We have two accounts used for recording factory overhead: factory overhead control and applied factory overhead. The factory overhead control is the actual amount of factory overhead cost actually incurred. And to enter the amount of the actual factory overhead in our books, the entry would be factory overhead control debit and then credit various factory overhead accounts. Now, the factory overhead applied to production, we do not use factory overhead control. Instead, we used applied factory overhead. And the entry would be debit work in process and then credit applied factory overhead. These two accounts uh, do not normally have the same amount. Since factory overhead control is the actual amount and the applied factory overhead is just an estimated amount, normally they do not have the same amount. Now, how do we estimate factory overhead? The estimated factory overhead is the one applied to production, and therefore we need to have some basis of how are we going to estimate the factory overhead. And we have to first understand some capacity of productions so that we could have an understanding of how do we base the estimate of the factory overhead. Now we have here different capacity of production. When we say theoretical capacity, that's the maximum or ideal capacity where uh, where the plant or the department's capability to produce are without any interruption, meaning it assumes that nothing will go wrong in the production. It gives no allowance for any human and non-human errors. It is a production in full efficiency. So if we will be estimating a factory overhead using theoretical or maximum capacity, the denominator that will be used to estimate the predetermined overhead rate would be the maximum output that the plant could possibly produce without any considerations of human errors or non-human errors. Now, when we say practical capacity, this refers to plant or department's capability to produce with an allowance for internal factors. It means theoretical capacity less unavoidable operating interruptions such as shutdowns or holidays and other interruptions due to delay or machine breakdowns. So, if we will be using practical capacity and in determining predetermined overhead rate, it is at a little less than the output or the expected output for theoretical capacity, since we consider some internal factors. So, the possible product of using practical capacity in determining predetermined overhead rate is a bit higher than theoretical capacity. Now we also have normal capacity. This is the most commonly used capacity and it is driven by customer or business demand and not by the maximum capacity. It takes into consideration the seasonal and cyclical demand of the product and is usually estimated over the number of periods or seasons. It takes into account the lost capacity resulting from planned maintenance, and it is practical capacity less loss of productive capacity due to external factors. So, meaning when we use normal capacity in determining predetermined overhead rate, the denominator is less than the practical capacity because we just uh, simply do not consider internal factors alone, but also external factors. So if we will be using normal capacity in determining predetermined overhead rate, then we will come up with a higher uh, factory overhead rate. Now, expected or budget refers to the level based on expected capacity for the budget period. So this one is more flexible than the three because uh, the number of capacity depends on the budget. That's why sometimes this is called a flexible predetermined overhead rate. So if the actual factory overhead is different from the applied factory overhead, the difference between the actual and the applied is called a variance. And the variance is eliminated at the end of the period. If it is over applied, the factory overhead resulting to over application is a is caused by an excess of uh, applications of overhead, meaning the applied factory overhead is higher than the factory overhead, while under applied factory overhead is a result of applying less than factory overhead. So at the end of the period, we will have a variance. So how do we eliminate the variance? If the variance is insignificant or immaterial and it is an over application, the entry would be debit factory overhead applied and then credit cost of goods sold. If we do this entry, the effect would be a decrease in the applied factory overhead and a decrease in the cost of goods sold. Why? Because we over applied our factory overhead. While if the amount is significant or immaterial and it is an under application, the entry would be debit cost of goods sold, credit factory overhead applied. If we do this entry, we will increase the factory overhead applied and the cost of goods sold simply because we have lesser applications of factory overhead. Now, if the amount is significant or very material, then the entry would be different. If it is over applied, the entry would be debit factory overhead, credit cost of goods sold, credit finished goods, and credit work in process. So the effect of this entry would be a decrease in factory overhead applied since it is over applied, and a decrease in the cost of goods sold, decrease in finished goods, and decrease in work in process. So in reverse, if it is under applied, the entry would be debit cost of goods sold, debit finished goods, and debit work in process, and credit factory overhead applied. Since it is under applied, we have to add or increase the factory overhead applied. And therefore, there's a corresponding increase in the cost of goods sold, finished goods, and work in process. Now, how do we allocate the over or under applied factory overhead? We will be basing the allocation on their ending balance. Now, the predetermined overhead rate uh, could be applied either in a plant-wide basis or on a per department basis. When we say plant-wide or blanket rate, the company uses a single overhead rate to allocate all of its factory overhead costs to jobs, product, or department. So regardless of the number of units per job, we will be using one single predetermined overhead rate because we are applying a plant-wide or a blanket rate. On the other hand, if we will be using departmental overhead rate, the company will use one factory overhead rate for each department, meaning each department or each job will have a different predetermined overhead rate. Now, when we compute predetermined overhead rate, the formula would be the, divide the estimated factory overhead cost to estimated allocation base. So, in our previous lesson, the estimated or predetermined overhead rate is computed as estimated factory overhead cost divided by direct labor hours or direct labor cost. So in this slide, as you can see, you can use other bases like labor cost, labor hours, machine hours, material cost, and other bases like physical output or unit produced. You just simply replace the estimated allocation base. Or you can also use other bases like area, floor area, number of times of usage, number of personnel, or space occupied. Since we allow other bases to be used to estimate the predetermined overhead rate, each basis must be related to the factory overhead that we wanted to calculate. Like, for example, if we are to distribute the depreciation expense of the building, we can use space occupied. So there must be a relationship between the base and the cost that we wanted to distribute. Factory rent, we can use space occupied instead of direct labor hours or direct labor cost. Insurance building, we can use space occupied. Interior and building maintenance, we can use space occupied. Supervision, number of employees. Light, kilowatt hour used. Power, maybe horsepower. Telephone, maybe number of employees. Insurance equipment, value of equipment. Depreciation, value of equipment. Equipment maintenance, maybe number of machines or machine hours. Property taxes, space occupied. Freight in, material used. Materials handling, probably quantity of materials. So as you can see, the allocation base to be used should be specifically or nearly related to the expenses that being allocated. Like factory rent, if the entire building is composed of 50% factory and 50% administration building, then we can use space occupied by the factory rent to allocate the cost of rent for the factory. So the allocation base is more related to the expenses that we wanted to distribute. Now, for services departments, we can use the following bases also. Like materials handling, we can use materials used. For procurement, number of orders or cost of materials. For personnel, number of employees, labor cost or hours. For receiving department, materials used, number of hours. Plant security, number of employees. Maintenance, space occupied. Production control, number of units processed. Medical, number of employees. So the allocation base is more responsive, more related than using direct labor hours, or direct labor cost. Now, service department are not revenue generating departments. This service department serves other service departments or the income generating departments. For example, we have three different departments, departments A, B, and C. And we also have production department, where the productions of goods to be sold are being manufactured. Say service department serves the production department and also serves service department B and service department C. So all costs incurred by service department A should be allocated to production department, service department B, and service department C. However, service department B also serves production department and also serves production service department A and service department C. So all costs incurred in service department B should be allocated to service department A, service department C, and production department. Now, if service department C serves production department, service department A, and service department B, its cost should also be allocated to both department and the production department. So if that is the case, there is a continuous flow of cost between service departments and the terminal allocations of cost to production department, since production department does not serve the service department. So how can we allocate, or how can we totally allocate the cost between these service departments to the production department? We will be using either direct method, step method, and algebraic method. When we say direct method, it allocates department costs directly to the revenue producing or operating areas without recognitions of service provided among the other service department. So in this method, we will disregard the services provided by other service department to the service department's cost to be allocated. In a step method, it allocates department cost to other service department to operating department in a sequential manner, meaning there will be some order of how are we going to allocate first the cost of a particular service department to the next department and to the last department. There will be no other cost of service department to be transferred to another department. So what would be the basis of the order of allocation? We can use first in terms of which service department has the largest amount or the largest services. If they have similar amount of services served or provided to other service department, then we have to use the uh, amount of cost. Now we can also use algebraic method wherein service department costs are first determined with the use of simultaneous equations, and the true costs of the service department are computed, and these costs are then distributed to revenue producing operating areas on the basis of a given ratio. So in algebraic method, we need to learn how to compute for the true cost of each service department and distribute it according to the ratio. So let's try some example. Assuming this is the record of a certain company, hold on, I'll just make it fit the screen. Okay. Say we have three service department, human resource, maintenance, and security department. And we have two production department, assembly department, and finishing department. Now the overhead cost for the five departments are as follows: 600,000 for human resource, 250,000 for maintenance, 150,000 for security, 2,500,000 for assembly, and 2,600,000 for finishing. And we need to compute for their predetermined overhead rate. For the number of employees, there are 60 employees in maintenance, 40 employees in the security, 200 in assembly, and 100 in finishing, for a total of 400. We do not assign number of employees to human resource because uh, the allocation base for human resource will be the number of employees. So we will not be assigning any number of employees to human resource since we will be allocating his cost to other departments. Now for maintenance, his allocation base would be space occupied. So the space occupied by human resource is 15,000, security is 10,000, assembly is 40,000, and finishing 60,000. So his allocation base again is space occupied. So therefore, we will not be assigning space occupied to maintenance. For security, the allocation base would be number of hours worked. We have 30,000 hours to human resource, 40,000 hours for maintenance, and 65,000 both to assembly and finishing department for a total of 200,000. So again, this is the base. For human resources, number of employees. For maintenance is space occupied. For security is number of hours worked. For assembly, the base would be 30,000 machine hours, and for finishing, 60,000 direct labor hours. So I also include the order of priority here when we will be using the step method. So we will first allocate the cost of human resource, and then the maintenance, and then the security. So let's apply first the direct method of allocating service cost. So in using direct method, we will disregard the services provided to other service department. We will simply allocate all of our costs directly to the production departments. So if the allocation base of human resource is number of employees and the assembly department has 200 employees, while finishing department has 100 employees. So in total, they have 300 employees. This will be now the base to allocate the 600,000. That would be 600,000 times 200 over 300. That would be the allocation of the cost for assembly, and that is equivalent to 400,000. Now, for finishing department, the allocation base would be number of employees, and he has 100 employees. So 100 times over 300 times 600,000, that's 200,000. So as you can see, all the 600,000 were allocated directly to the production department only and none to the other service department. So we will do the same to other service department. For maintenance, the allocation base is the space occupied. So for assembly, they occupy 40,000 square meters for area. For finishing is 60. So that would be for assembly is 40 over 100 times the 250 equals 100,000. For finishing, that's 60 over 100 times 250. For the security department, it uses number of hours work as the allocation base. So since assembly uses 65 and finishing is also 65, it seems like they will be allocating the cost of security in a 50-50 basis. So the 150,000 would be divided to them equally. So after dividing, we will now arrive at the total factory overhead cost for assembly and the finishing department. We can now divide this to its allocation base, which is 30,000 machine hours for assembly and 60,000 direct labor hours for finishing. So for assembly, 3,075,000 divided by 30,000, we now have a factory overhead rate of 102.50, the predetermined overhead rate for assembly. For finishing, we have 3,025,000 divided by 60,000, we have 50.42 predetermined overhead rate. Right. Now, for the step method, since we already uh, mentioned that we will be using the order of priority in the example, wherein human resource will be allocated first, and then maintenance, and then security. But the process would be like this. We first allocate the 600,000 from the human resource using the allocation base of number of employees. For maintenance, they have 60 employees. For security, they have 40 employees. Assembly has 200 and finishing have 100. So in total, they all have 400 employees. So for maintenance, the share of maintenance to 600 from 600,000 would be 60 divided by 400 times the 600,000, that's 90,000. For security, that's 40 over 400 times the 600,000, that's 60,000. For assembly, that's 200 divided by 400 times 600,000, that's 300,000. For finishing, 100 employees divided by 400 times 600,000, that's 150,000. Next, we now have to allocate the cost of the maintenance department. Since we allocated 90,000 to maintenance coming from the human resource, the total cost now to be allocated to other department would be 340,000. That's 250 plus 90 equals 340,000. So to allocate 340, we will be using space occupied. So for security, They have 10,000 over 110,000 times 340,000, that's 30,909.09. For assembly, that's 40,000 divided by 110,000 times 340,000 equals 123,636.36. For finishing, that's 60,000 divided by 110,000 times 340,000 equals 185,454.56. And lastly, for our final step, we will now allocate the total cost from the security, that is 150 plus 60 from the human resource and plus 30,909.09 from the maintenance for a total of 240,909.09. And you will be using number of hours worked. Since the assembly and finishing department are the remaining departments where these costs will be allocated, and they use an equal amount of number of hours, 65,000 and 65,000, you can simply just divide 240,909.09 into 2. That's 120,454.55. And then you add up all the expenses or costs or factory overhead costs in the assembly department and the finishing department. For assembly, we have 3,044,090.91. For finishing, we have 3,055,909.11. So divide again into the base. For assembly, that's 30,000 machine hours. We will get 101.47 predetermined overhead rate. For finishing, that's 50.93. Let's compare it to the direct method. Okay, so for finishing, we got 50.93 using step method, 50.42 for direct method. For assembly, 102.50 from using direct method and 101.47 using step method. Now, we use algebraic method. This method is the more complex method in allocating service department cost. Okay, in using algebraic method, we have to first determine the true amount of cost to be distributed among the service department and the assembly department and the production department. So in our given problem, the 600,000 is the actual cost incurred in each department. However, the 600,000 is not the true cost yet for the human resource because maintenance serves human resource as well as security serves human resource. So therefore, if we will be allocating cost to human resource coming from maintenance and security, 600,000 is not the true cost yet. So we have to get the true cost in each department before we allocate it to production department and other service departments. So how are we going to do that? First, we have to set up equations. We have to uh, create a variable that will represent the cost of each service department. So say A would be the true cost of human resource, B would be the true cost of maintenance, and C is the true cost of security. Now, the equation would be for the true cost of human resource, that's A is equals to 600,000 plus 15,000 over 125,000 of B plus 30,000 over 200,000 of C, or 600,000 plus 12% of B plus 15% of C. So where did we get all these figures? 600,000 is the original cost assigned to human resource. This one. Now the 15,000 over 125,000 is the basis for allocating the cost of the maintenance department. Since human resource occupies 15,000 from a total of 125,000, so his share in the maintenance cost would be 15 over 125 times the B, or the cost of maintenance. For security, the share of human resource to the security cost would be 30,000 over 200,000 of the cost of security, and that is 30,000 over 20,000 of C. Or you can simplify this one by getting the percentage of these amounts. So 15,000 over 125,000 is also 12%. So that is 12% P. 30,000 divided by 200,000 is 15%. That's 15% of C. So you do the same procedure to B and C. That's 250 plus 60 over 400. That's 60 over 400. And then 40 over 200. There must be just a simple, a little error here. That's 60 over 400. Or simply 15% A plus 20% C. Okay, so for C is 40 over 400 plus 10 over 125, or 10% and 8%. Okay, now let us now compute for the true cost. We can start from any letters that you want, A, B, or C. We will just we will arrive at the same answer even if we start from any letters. You just have to simply follow the procedure. So for this one, we will solve for B first. I'll give you a hint of uh, what to do if you wanted to start from any other letters, but you should arrive at the same amount. So for B, the equation would be, the original equation is B is equals to 250 plus 15% of A plus 20% of C, right? Now, we will choose A to be replaced by its original equation. It's up to you which one do you want to replace, but for sure you will arrive at the same equation. But you cannot replace uh, two variables at the same time. You should do it one at a time. So for this equation, we will replace A first, but we will not replace C. So if B is equals to 250 plus 15% of A, and A is equals to 600,000 plus 12% B plus 15% C, as stated here above, that would be, this is the only variable that we have to replace. A first. We will not replace C. Again, we will replace one variable at a time. So at this point, we will replace A first. So after replacing, we can now compute for other figures. So 250 times 15% of 600, that's 90,000, plus 15% of 12%, that's 1.8B, plus 15% times 15% C, that's 2.25C, plus 20% of C. And then combine similar terms. So 250 plus 90 is 340, 1.8% B, plus 22.25% C, that's 2.25 plus 20% C. Okay, combine again, transfer 1.8% B to the left, and we will get 98.2%. That's a deductions because this one is positive. When we transpose it to the other side, it will become negative. So 98.2% is equals to 340 plus 22.25% C. Now at this point, we have to pause for a while because even if we divide this by 98.2%, we still have a variable of C. So we have to compute first for the value of C before we can arrive at the final amount. So we have to pause from uh, at this point. Now let's compute for the value of C. So when we compute for the value of C, the variable that you replaced here should be the same variable that you will be replacing when computing for the next variable or the letter C. So if we use uh, the equations for letter A in computing for variable B, then we have to use also the equation of A in computing for the value of C. So that's 150 plus 10% of A. Let me just show you the original equations of C. That C is equals to 150 plus 10% of A plus 8% of B. Okay, so that's 150 plus 10% of 600 plus 12% B plus 15% C. Where did we get this one? From the equation of letter A. We will replace A by its equation, just like what we did in variable B. We replace A by its equation. So after doing this, we can now compute for or continue computing for variable C. That's 150 times plus 10% of 600, that's 60,000. 10% times 12%, that's 1.2% B. 10% times 15% C is 1.5 C. And then plus 8% B, right? Okay, next. C is now equal to 210,000. That's 150 plus 60,000 plus 9.2% of B. That's 1.2% plus 8%. That's 9.2% B plus 1.5% C. So as you can see, uh, when you solve for uh, three variables within the equation, you must be able to arrive at the same variable uh, like for this one, B and C. So for equation C, they also have the same variable C and B only. You must be able to eliminate the variable that that is not included in the first equation. that you are trying to solve. So for B, we don't have a variable here. So here we have to eliminate a variable also. So C is now equal to 210 plus 9.2% B plus 1.5% C. Okay, so we transpose 1.5% to the other side. We will now have 98.5% C is equals to 210,000 plus 9.2% B. Now, if we divide this by 98.5, we will get the value of C, which is 213,197.96 plus 9.34010% B. Now, we will now use this amount to replace the variable C in the first equation. The first uh, variable that we are trying to solve, and that is variable B. So bringing this down, 98.2% B is equals to 340,000 plus 22.25% C. And we will now replace C by its value. That's 213,197.96 plus 9.34010% B. Okay, so multiply the percentage. We will now have 98.2% B is equals to 340 plus 47,436.55 plus 2.07817% B. So combine again, 340 plus 47, that's 387, and then 2.078 transpose to the other side, and then we have to deduct this one. So the answer would be 96.12183% P is equals to 387,436.55. Divide both sides by 96.12183%. We will have B is equals to 403,068 pesos and 22 centavos. So this is now the true amount of factory overhead cost of Department B, which is the maintenance department. This one, 403,068.22. Now, when you solve for one variable, it is now easy for us to solve the other variables. So C, simply copy the one that you already computed above, this one, and replace the variable B with its true amount, and then you will get C is equals to 250,844.93. That's the true amount of the variable C, or the security department. Now for the letter A, or the human resource department, again, simply replace the value. Okay, since we have the value for B and the value for C, we can now have compute for the value of A, which is 685,994.93. This one. Now let us now distribute the cost. Again, this one is given. Let me put colors so that you will not be confused. This one is given, this one is given, 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 and also this one. And of course, this all, the basis for allocation. Now we compute for the yellow ones. Okay, now let's distribute first the 685,994.93. The true amount of the human resource. Okay. Uh, for the maintenance department, the formula would be 60 divided by 400 times 685. That's 102. For security, that's 40 over 400. That's 68,599. For assembly, that's 200 over 400. That's 342. Hold on. For finishing department, that's 100 over 400 times 685,994. For maintenance, the share of human resource to maintenance cost uh, would be computed as follows: 15 over 125 times 403. So for security, that's 10 over 125 times 32, and so on and so on. For security, the share of human resource is 30 over 200 times 250. For maintenance, that's 40,000 divided by 200,000 times 250. That's 50,168. So you do the same to assembly and finishing, and then you add up. For assembly, we have 3,053,000. For finishing, that's 3,046,000. Divide it by the base, 30 and 60, you will now arrive at the predetermined overhead rate of 101.78 and 50.77. Right, now let's go back to our slide if we still have something to. None. Okay, I think I was able to cover the entire chapter for accounting for factory overhead. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you are all safe and you are doing your part by studying your lessons. See you in the school. See you soon. Take care, everyone.